Well, thank you, Dwight, and welcome to the Montgomery County Republican Club's direct line. And tonight we have Duane Carey. We're getting ready for sometimes the most scary period in Maryland, which is when the legislature comes back in session. Duane is with Maryland Free, which is a strong free enterprise advocacy group. And Duane, I'm not going to put you quite on the spot, so you don't have to agree or disagree with what I'm about to say. You can just kind of nod along. But one of the great things about Maryland Free is that it represents business. And somebody who works for a trade association, and I know what it's like to be a trade association, I have to say, sometimes people in the business community in Maryland aren't as robust advocates for their interests as they might be. I like to say they suffer from the Stockholm syndrome, but Maryland Free, that is that they've kind of begun to empathize with their captors. That said, I also appreciate the position there, and you guys are in a position to, on the other hand, to make a very robust advocacy on the part of the business community, and as a result, you do a great service. Now, tell me a little bit. I know we're obviously familiar with Ellen Sauerbrey's role. Can you kind of, and also like Governor Mandel, talk a little bit about the leadership changes that have taken place at Maryland Free first?
Sure. Well, first of all, Mark, Dwight, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. And I won't let you put me on the spot too much. I'll dance a little bit if I need to.
Right. Okay. No, you don't have to comment. I mean, I don't diss other associations, and you shouldn't either. But that's just an observation that I would make.
What I will say to that is, one of the biggest issues I think that we have is that the business community is so fractured in Maryland. There are a lot of groups, and we're not singing from the same hymnal for sure. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of my personal goals is to just do more to try to bring all of these groups together. And maybe we can talk about that a little further as we go, particularly as it relates to our PAC. So your question about leadership, when, I don't know how many people realize, so Maryland Free is a almost 37-year-old now organization that's been really doing great work. I've been involved for 7 or 8 years, but I love the fact that there was that point where there were co-chairs. This is before my time, but you had the very well-known Democrat Governor Marvin Mandel and the very well-known, very conservative Ellen Sauerbrey as co-chairs. And that's how it should be, I think. We really need to have a good representation from both sides of the aisle to be able to speak the same language with these legislators. So many of them do not come from a business background. They don't have any idea about what it takes to grow an economy, to grow employment, what the issues are that employers go through. So we're very blessed to still have Ellen very much involved in the organization. And I tell people this all the time, and I don't know if they really believe me or not, but I mean it. She has more energy than I do at 50. I'm 52.
She is an absolute dynamo. There's no question about that.
And the sharpness is unbelievable. She is on top of things, and it's super, super helpful that she's still involved. Our current leadership, so after Ellen, then we had a couple of other chairs, and now for the last pretty much the same tenure that I have been the president, Scott Dorsey, the chairman and CEO of Merritt Properties, has been the chair of the board. And we've got a really strong board. We've been growing it. We've actually been growing it across the aisle as well. We really have an excellent mix now of both Republicans and Democrats, and of course several independents. But our whole point, and we can probably talk about this more, I don't want to take up all the time here, but we're so focused on just the facts about business and economic growth, and we do not get into any of the other political things that everybody argues about, none of the social issues. It's really about tax and spend, regulatory environment. What conditions are we creating for employers to employ? So we've got a great collection of leaders, young and old, and all over the spectrum of people that are out there day by day working in the field.
And we should probably just simply explain for those who are familiar with the group under its prior name, explain that change took place, right?
Yeah, so that was, I guess a year and a half, maybe even close to two years ago now. So first of all, it was Maryland Business for Responsive Government, MBRG, and that's a mouthful. And a lot of people had trouble with the abbreviation. They would transpose the letters. They wouldn't remember what it meant. And we decided it was time to just, a new brand. We're still exactly what we've always been. We still do things the same way, but we thought it would be better to represent ourselves a little more from this concept of economic freedom and free enterprise. I was just complete aside. I was just looking yesterday at the Heritage Foundation's economic freedom rankings, and throughout the world, the United States of America is now 17th in economic freedom, and we're behind Estonia, Georgia. When you have former Soviet states more free than America, that's a big problem. I was looking at it because I'm writing an article for Maryland Free, and Maryland is 20th out of the 50 states as far as economic freedom. So anyway, the Maryland Free Enterprise Foundation is our full new name, and we go by Maryland Free for short, but we found it really useful. A lot of people really didn't like the name, by the way. A lot of people who've been around for a couple of decades, and I don't mean people on our board, everybody on the board loved it, but some of the people that you might call stakeholders who've been around, who've been legislators or longtime supporters, thought it was one person, he wouldn't mind me saying, I don't know if you know who Mike Gill is, the former Secretary of Commerce, told me flat out it was a stupid name. But it represents us well. We are about free enterprise, and the more we can teach people what free enterprise is and how important it is to growing an economy, the better. So we invite people to ask.
Now, you really kind of touched on the comparison of different jurisdictions, and I have to say that in this COVID era, I think hopefully a lot of people are that much more sensitive of the ability to be able to move from one place to another. How's Maryland doing?
Very, very poorly, actually. Let me give you a web address to send your listeners to. Not now while we're talking, wait until later. HowMoneyWalks.com. An author, Travis Brown. In fact, I was just speaking with him today. He has pulled data, really robust academic data based on the census that shows conclusively how money walks from one state to another. And of course, right now that's terribly exacerbated because of COVID. In fact, I have one of my employees, so I have a day job. I own a business, and one of my employees is moving to North Carolina in a few months, and I don't care. And another one might be moving to a different state. And, there's nothing tethering us, most of us, that we can't overcome. So How Money Walks looks at the net loss of gross domestic product from each of the states. And if you go on that website, so he's got a great book, but then he put all the data into a website. And if you look at that website, there's a map and it's color coded, and you can see we're one of the worst states, along with, you guessed it, California, Massachusetts, New York, of states where wealth is fleeing. Wealth is leaving our state. And it's not, there's been a lot of arguments from the politicians over the years that, well, that's just because people want to move where it's warm. Well, guess what? One of the biggest inflows states is Idaho. And it's not warm and balmy in Idaho. That's people
New Hampshire
fleeing
advantage.
California.
And New Hampshire has historically picked up quite a bit from Massachusetts.
That's right. And South Dakota is a big net gainer.
Right.
So there's a lot of net gainers, and unfortunately, we're one of the net losers, and in a big way.
But this is obviously data that looks back, and one of the things that looking forward that Maryland has got to be sensitive to is the fact that with COVID. Now, right now, we're in Montgomery County. Obviously, we have people who listen from around the state, but
sure.
Maryland and Montgomery County in particular have really benefited from the proximity to the federal government. That you wanted to be a contractor, that most of the jobs actually are not government employees, but are contractor related. There was a huge advantage, obviously, of being closer to your customer and being close to the government. And there was a, how shall I say, a premium, a location premium that could be charged in real estate to be close to that center. As more jobs can be dispersed, the top guy may, or some people who are most actively interfacing with the agency may want to be in town, but more and more of those jobs can be anywhere in the country. And I've seen some data that says that the number of remote workers may triple after COVID's all done, from around 5% to 15%. And that could mean a lot of, how did you say it? Money walking, ending up moving to more hospitable locales.
That's right. And, when you look at it in the larger picture, I think back to sequestration during the Obama years. That hurt when all of a sudden budgets were slashed or at least put on hold for quite a while. That there was a significant effect on Maryland's economy.
Right.
And us crazy pro-business people had been, shouting from the rooftops for years and years and years that, guys, we can't just focus on the government contractors. There's more to employment in Maryland than that. We have to look at the private sector and not continually set up onerous policies that keep people from moving to Maryland. And that was, I hope, a bit of a wake-up call for people that, hey, maybe this is real. And so now we have, with this massive change in how people work, these tax revenues are not going to be here. People are going to move to the low tax and no tax states at a much faster rate than they have been historically. COVID has sped up things that were already going to happen by a factor of 500. In many cases, something that was 5 years out is now here. So
now we're coming up to, as we talked about at the outset, this dangerous period in Maryland when Annapolis has the legislators and the session is going on. Talk to me, what do you see as some of the top issues that they're going to be taking up, and what's got you worried?
I think probably highest on our list is Kerwin. So for those who don't know, that's the overhaul, the round two overhaul of Maryland's education environment. Even though our teachers are among the highest paid in the nation, and there's more money spent per pupil than most other jurisdictions in the nation. We had the Kerwin Commission that looked at revamping our education system. And in the last session, which of course was truncated because of COVID, It was their highest priority. They passed it. And it's a $32 billion spending bill. And the governor, within days of COVID becoming an obvious, massive problem for our economy, rightfully vetoed that bill. And, again, there's a supermajority in the legislature, so they can just very easily override that veto. I expect that to happen. I just read an article yesterday, I think, that was predicting that they would wait till like middle of the session. Usually they override the vetoes
right.
Day one. I think they might be a little afraid of this issue, afraid of having to raise, obviously, if you're going to raise spending so dramatically, you have to raise taxes dramatically. And that did happen last session as well, but the governor vetoed those bills as well. So they're going to be faced with, okay, what do? We staked our ground here that this is our top priority. It's still their top priority. And do they really want to raise taxes on almost every business? For example, House Bill 732. There's House Bill 732 and House Bill 932, both passed, and those are taxes on digital commerce, essentially. And in the case of 732, it's every business that advertises on Google, which is pretty much every business that advertises. If anyone is looking to advertise, they're on Google. And it's a massive tax. It's a 10% gross receipts tax. And I just wrote an article a few weeks ago on why economically it's obvious that no one, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they're not going to be paying those taxes, period. Businesses will pay those taxes because they'll pass it along, and there's good economic truth as to why that will happen. It's inelasticity of demand, and it pretty much dictates that they're just going to pass along every single penny of that. So a plumber spending $1,000 a month in Montgomery County on Google ads is only getting $900 worth of ads.
Right.
But that his competition in Loudoun County, Virginia, spending the same amount is getting $1,000 worth of ads. Now, do you want to tell me that doesn't put that Maryland business at a massive competitive disadvantage to his competitors across the river?
And I'm assuming that now larger businesses that can buy advertising on a national or even regional area, how do they propose to collect the tax there? Or they just assume the business is going to be just collected in Maryland? I mean, how's that?
Well, it's interesting. What a very astute question. You may have hit on why after, I don't know, 10, 15 years of pushing combined reporting, even though study after study has said it's actually not a net gain to Maryland, maybe that's why they pushed combined reporting and passed it last year in the last session.
So they would be able to capture that, breaking that out. Okay.
But this is a big deal. There's these big tech companies are not going to roll over on this, and I mean there's questions of constitutionality on this. So we'll see.
Now, tell me how much do they think that would raise? I mean, let me tell you where I'm coming from is during the discussion of Kerwin, and you would hear a variety of numbers and what have you, and ideas would get kicked around. I think our county executive before he was county executive while I was running, Mark Elridge, talked about pot tax, and there were various kinds of tax proposals. Oh, we'll pay it with X, Y, or Z, and rarely did they add up to the kinds of numbers that Kerwin asks for. So there was kind of a pig in the poke of they want to add this tax or that tax, but none of it would cover the whole thing.
You're right on. And I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember what the dollar percentage was. I'm sorry, the actual dollar amount that it raises. Sure. But we pointed out in roll call, and I should probably introduce what roll call is to your audience, but we pointed out in roll call that it was a drop in the bucket. It was simply a start. These two bills, 732 and 930, and by the way, 932 is a tax on all the downloads. So a book, a record, a document, a PDF, all kinds of things that would now be taxed, and accounting nightmares to go along with that. But we talked about the fact that, look, it's not enough. It's not going to. It would have just been a start, and that helps you kind of harken back to some of the other bills that failed. And if you recall, it was HB 1628. I think it may have been a Montgomery County delegate. That was the sales and use tax change that dropped the sales tax from 6% to 5%, but made it cover every service in the state. And that would have raised a tremendous amount of money. But it was so poorly received that even the bill's sponsor voted against it in committee. It went down 22-0 in committee. So what will they be coming up with to replace that? That's really the big question, because you can't, we have a balanced budget requirement. We're not the federal government that can just print money. Right. So if you're going to increase all this spending, how are you going to pay for it? Now, the caveat to that, which is an important one, and the proponents always bring this up, is there is enough money already to get Kerwin started for the first few years. I forget how many, but it's the longer term problem that has everyone worried.
So anyway, so what are some of the other issues? We've talked about competition, COVID. What could the state be doing on COVID? Is this something the legislature is going to take up?
So COVID isn't something that we're tracking closely, believe it or not, even though it's the gigantic elephant in every room these days.
Right.
But what we look at is business related bills. So obviously the biggest one with COVID is liability protection. Mm-hmm. But that's being handled primarily at the federal level. And we're strictly, our lane is Maryland. We don't touch on the federal. I think one of the bigger things, just answers your question on what else, but it also harkens back to that last topic of how are they going to raise money for to fund Kerwin. There was a raft of bills in the House, several of which passed last session, that sought to eliminate or weaken or prematurely terminate tax credits. And a whole group of tax credits like One Maryland, More Jobs for Maryland, Enterprise Zones, and there's 6 or 7 of them. The cybersecurity credit, tax credit, and of course, other than the cybersecurity, all of these tax credits are set up to grow employment, right, to attract businesses to where employment is needed. So these enterprise zones in Baltimore City, where the unemployment is desperate, right? Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, these places really need these tax credits. And one of the delegates in her email to her constituents described it as clawing back money from corporate giveaways. And no, that is not what it is. It's stimulating the economy. It's
very targeted.
Exactly.
What they chose, the areas that they want to prioritize.
Yeah. So we're concerned about that. Several of these bills passed in the House, and then would they have passed in the Senate if they didn't have to bug out of town because of COVID? Are they coming back this year? I think there's probably a good chance of it. So that's of concern.
So are there other threats that we should be paying attention to down the road, or are you waiting? I say that it's kind of a challenge this time of year because you have a whole series of bills that have been pre-filed that is introduced before they come back in session. And there's something of a triage, I know you do and others do, of identifying, what is real that may be, something to be very worried about, or something that may be something that was just introduced by a legislator and that they're not pursuing. And there's probably a third category of, forgive me, there's probably the Montgomery County delegation bills of some really, well, I'll be some really nutty stuff that probably won't get traction elsewhere, but God knows they love to do that in Montgomery County.
So you touch on an interesting quirk about Maryland Free. If you notice, each of the bills that I just talked about that we're concerned about are bills that were already introduced and already voted on. What I haven't talked about is speculation or any bills that have been pre-filed that we've looked at and we're worried about. And that is that approach has been here from the beginning of Maryland Free when it was MBRG. We don't telegraph which bills we may or may not score. And I mentioned earlier, I should talk about roll call. Let me do that so everybody knows what we're talking about. And then I'll come back and finish this answer. Once a year at the conclusion, following the conclusion of the 90-day legislative session, Maryland Free has a large committee of stakeholders. A lot of them are lobbyists who have been on the floor at the State House and know these bills intimately. We select generally around 10 bills in the House and around 10 bills in the Senate. Last year was an aberration. We had 11 in the Senate and 20 in the House because it was just such a huge number of bills that had to be acknowledged. So we look only at bills that have an effect on business and employment, whether they're job creators or job destroyers. We very judiciously, it's a huge undertaking, go through and score all 181 state legislators, 47 in the Senate, 131 in the House, and we give them a simple plus or minus on each bill. So if there's 10 bills and somebody voted the correct way on 8 of them, they get an 80%. And then there's some other nuances that go in there as well. So when you do that every year, and then we also do a cumulative score, that tells the story over that legislator's entire tenure. And so because we score that way, it's very forensic. It's not forward-looking. We're not lobbying. We do not lobby at Maryland Free. We leave that to the chamber and NFIB and so many of the other organizations that are out there looking out for business. But if we feel that our process would be jeopardized if we said, hey, don't vote for this or do vote for that. Instead, what we do is stick to principles and say, don't vote for things that are going to raise costs on employers. Don't vote for things that are going to make people want to build a kiosk in their lobby rather than hire 3 employees. Very straightforward things. So because of that, I don't have a list for you of other bills that we're worried about. But while I'm on the topic of roll call, let me give a plug for over the last couple of years, we've developed an app called Vote Jobs Maryland. And if you just Google that or go to Google Play or the Apple Store, you can download the app for an Android or for an Apple. And right there, that gives people the opportunity to look up their legislator just based on their address, see what their votes are, click through and see why their scores are where they are because they voted for this, they didn't vote for that, etc. And it's a great way for people to really be fully engaged, because most Marylanders, most people don't know who their delegates are or their senator. If you say the name, they'll say, yeah, maybe I've heard of that. But people like you in a political club are definitely a self-selected small percentage. So we're trying to get everybody, and we're doing a whole ad campaign on Vote Jobs Maryland. We're trying to get as many people to use these data. They're out there for a reason. It takes a lot of work to build it. And we want people to look at it. And then every time their delegate or senator calls and says, hey, how about sending me a donation? It's, well, why don't we look at your score first?
Sure. Could you help us? I mean, you explain a little bit about how you see the process is going to work with the legislature this year. Obviously, and I preface this by, there was a real premium if you wanted to influence legislators, of a real advantage to going to Annapolis and waiting in line, signing up and taking your turn and testifying. So as they go virtually, how's that process going to work, and how can people have the same impact that they had when they were traveling to Annapolis?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that people, I think the only thing that you lose there is that bumping into people in the hallway, bumping into people at Harry Brown's. I mean, I don't know if everybody knows what Harry Brown's is, but it's a restaurant and bar in Annapolis that a ton of decisions have been made over the years, over lots of spilled whiskey and beer and wine. And so those kind of things, the people are going to suffer a lot by not being able to do that. But I am convinced that on the big issues, and this is where, lobbyists get such a bad rap in our society. People don't realize how much lobbyists educate legislators. That's the job. The job is educating legislators, and because there's no way these legislators know about all of these different topics. The only way they do is by hearing from someone well-informed and being able to read reports and so forth. And so I think what's going to happen is those well-established lobbyists who have the really good long-term relationships, they're going to be just completely overwhelmed with work, because you have to know that somebody can pick up the cell phone and call Senator X or Delegate Y on their cell phone and get a hold of them and maybe set up a Zoom meeting. Right. So I think the frivolity, the idea of putting in legislation this year that's someone's pet project, that doesn't affect a large swath of people or organizations or businesses, I don't think you're going to see much of that. I think this is going to be a heavy focus on the really big issues. And Lord knows there's a lot of really big issues. They have to do things on COVID. They've got to do things with taxes on COVID. And as Mark, you and I were chatting before the show about rent and these rent abatement schemes that they've got going on now. There's so many issues just to be reactionary to this pandemic, that it's going to be the pandemic and a few of their top priorities, and they're going to be thrilled with themselves if they can get those things done.
So they're really going to be focused on a narrower set of issues.
That's my prediction. I don't know that to be true. But I mean, when you look at the State House and how it's set up, and they're all sequestered in these little plexiglass holding cells, and they're not going to want to be there. They're going to want to get in, get out, and just get their work done. It's going to be Back to your initial point, and it's a well-made point of, it's the most dangerous 90 days in Maryland. Maybe it'll be less dangerous because they might not be able to go after some of the pet projects, and they'll just have to focus on the real meat and potatoes.
On the other hand, it's an opportunity to slip things through, and you don't have the chance to have that by the way conversation of, wait a second, do you know what this really does? And
that is true. That's a good point.
It'll be an interesting challenge. Help me out a little bit with what the governor's role is, and how do you interact with the governor, and how has he been? Obviously, as you said at the outset, we've said a couple of times, there's a super majority in the part of the Democrats. So that's they always have that opportunity on a party line of vote, at least, to override. That said, it only takes a few Democrats who may not want to go that far to help sustain a veto. So how does the governor help you, or how do you interact with him on your issues?
Sure. We don't interact with him much, frankly. We haven't had to. He gets it. He makes very good decisions from a business, employment, and economic standpoint. We interact with him once a year. We have a large luncheon where we do the state of business address with the governor. And very unfortunately, we weren't able to have it last year. And I don't even know about this year, the way things are going. This virus is not letting up. But it's such an important point, Mark, because people, I think the average Joe, even the average business owner Joe, don't understand really the power of the governor and the power of the legislature. And you can have arguably one of the most pro-business governors in the country, yet so many of the policies that determine our business climate are not at the gubernatorial level. They're at the legislative level. And that's where we get so frustrated, because here we've got an opportunity with somebody who really can grow this economy and make some structural changes to it. But we're stuck with so much tax and spend thinking that's a detriment to business growth.
Right.
So, again, we just don't, because we're not lobbyists, we don't have much interaction with all of the politicians, to be frank. It's very much forensic. We dig in afterwards, after the session, and then we say our piece and release roll call. Oh, by the way, if anyone wants to see that, which I hope you do, go to marylandfree.org/roll-call, I think it is, or just go to marylandfree.org, and it's a giant icon.
Can't miss it.
To see it. You can't miss it.
But it is good to be able to kind of at the end of the session to highlight what issues that you guys consider to be the most important. And I know it's good to see a lot of our legislators who love to trumpet the fact that they got 100% or really high percentages and have maintained career percentages are higher. Just one last comment. I mean, one of the things that's always kind of frustrating, and I think you've touched on it before, is how few small businessmen are in the legislature and are really not in it. So that really the interaction, you have a lot of people who have governments and local jobs in local government, or have something that's, or lawyers, insurance, whatever, but fewer who are, have customer interaction and know what it's like to meet a payroll. Is there any way to encourage more business people to run for the? I know that's not your job, but it would certainly help, not your job, but your, organization's approach. But it would really help to have much more of that experience shared with the legislatures.
I think most business owners are much too smart to run for office.
Well, and I
No,
get, I mean, it certainly is a huge challenge. I mean, let's be fair. I mean, it's a huge challenge for a business owner that's gotta, put everything on hold for 90 days and have
yeah,
this kind of all consuming
it,
period of time, and then, have to go try and pick up the pieces after session is over. So I
yeah.
get that problem.
I was just interacting with one of our Democratic legislators last week, and she was gearing up for the session and just moving nonstop. And I said, I don't know how you guys do this job, or why. It's there's a lot of trappings that come with it that people really like, but man, it's tough if you can't really run a business, a real business, and get away for 90 days. Obviously, I was joking about business owners are too smart for that, but they used to the legislature used to publish that. I want to say up until about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think at that time it was around 20% of the legislature was business owners. But honestly, a good part of that were like sole practitioner, estate lawyers, and other kinds of lawyers that maybe had an administrative assistant. So they weren't really employers. They didn't really know. Alan Kittleman used to say that I thought it was just a great line that people who are used to signing the backs of checks, not the fronts of checks.
Right.
And it's one of our top priorities. We, without regard to political party, we desperately need business owners to join the legislature, because that perspective is just not there. And this is made even worse when you think about activism, and the unions bust people in when there's a bill that is important, and everybody needs to feel comfortable that the masses are behind them. You'll have 3, 4, 5 buses on Lawyers Mall in Annapolis there all day, and somebody's getting paid.
Right.
Business owners can't go sit in Annapolis all day. They might be able to get away for an hour. They can't go all day. And so we constantly hear from legislators that, well, we never heard from business. Well, I mean, do you really need to hear from business that if you raise the minimum wage, business owners are going to hire fewer people? I mean, do you need to hear that, or can you deduce that? And
It's interesting. The data on that is really very strong. I
it's
really
strong.
thought we're coming to the end, and so really appreciate having the chance to hear from you. And
My pleasure.
we'll think about you as the club in the closet. So obviously, as people don't quite know where you're going to come out, they know what principles you're going to apply, but they know that you're out there watching what they're doing and keeping track, and as a result, being a real guardian for really not just businesses, but the economic well-being of all Marylanders. And some of us will be able to stay in the state because of what you're doing.
That's our goal. So many people flee the state when they retire, and we need to keep that wealth here in the state. And if I can just make a little pitch at the end here. So it's marylandfree.org. And we very much want to grow our ranks of business owners and retired business owners and anybody who cares. You made a great point, Mark, that this doesn't just affect business owners. And our board chair, Scott Dorsey, constantly says, if you have a job, you need to be pro-business.
Right.
There isn't a job on this planet, including government jobs. There's not a job that exists that is possible without the private sector. You don't have government jobs. You don't have nonprofits. You don't have anything without the private sector creating jobs and creating wealth. So MarylandFree.org. My email is Duane, Duane, at MarylandFree.org. Anybody wants to reach out, happy to chat, and we would love to have you part of our ranks.
Well, Duane, it's been great chatting with you, and thank you for
You
being
too.
a guest on Direct Line.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Great.
Have a good night.